Good afternoon. My name is Jack Keegan, and I'm an alcoholic. And Mary Ann asked me to go through the 12 steps one day a week, and my experience is when Mary Ann asks you to do something, you do it. So here I am. I'm going to discuss the steps in the ensuing weeks, and you may disagree with me about the steps, and that's okay. Just don't tell me. I've been a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous since July 14th, 1969, and I probably go to 3, 4, 5 meetings a week, and I've been doing it since that time. So I've heard a lot in AA, and what you're going to hear is a lot of plagiarism, because that's what Alcoholics Anonymous is all about. And what I'm going to tell you is what I've heard, and I'm not going to give the person credit who said it to begin with, and that's the way this works. So before I get started with the first step, I think I enjoy the history of AA, and I think it's a fascinating history. I was telling Mary Ann last week that our preamble, Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women. I was on a cruise without booze some years ago, and a fellow by the name of Al Steckman, who was the first editor of the Grapevine, was on the cruise, and we got to talking about the preamble, and he told me, for the first time that I knew about it, that our preamble was written for the United States Post Office, because as editor of the Grapevine, they wanted to know, because he was applying for a special permit to mail out the Grapevine, but they wanted to know, what is Alcoholics Anonymous? So they made up the preamble and sent it to the United States Post Office to satisfy whatever requirement they needed for a permit. So that's where we get our preamble from. A bit of trivia that is fascinating to me, may not be to you, but it is to me. I think we're all sitting in the middle of a miracle. We really are. To recover from this hopeless state of mind and body is truly a miracle. And I think we should take just a few minutes to discuss how the miracle started, where it started, how it began. I know we all know the Bill and Bob story, but there's more to it, really. Bill Wilson, father, took off when he was a youngster, and he lived in a place called East Dorset, Vermont. And Dr. Bob actually came from Vermont as well. And in this area of Vermont, there was a prep school that Bill Wilson went to, and his classmate was a fellow by the name of Ebby Thatcher, and he knew Ebby from prep school. In that area as well was a family known as Hazards. The Hazard family was kind of a wealthy family and used to come up to Vermont in the summertime. And Roland Hazard, in particular, was the man who was running the family business. Around the early 30s, Roland Hazard had developed into a raging alcoholic, and he went to the psychiatrist Carl Jung in Switzerland he was perhaps the most renowned psychiatrist in the world at that time. And Roland Hazard went there to see if he could help him with his drinking. And he stayed there, as you can imagine, for several months, and was being treated by Carl Jung And when he was finished, he figured he had it all. He wasn't drinking. And the story goes that he got about as far as Paris. And somebody asked him if he wanted a drink. And he was back in the basket again. And he went back to went back to Carl Jung and said, "Is there really any hope for me? You know, can you do anything for me?" And Dr. Jung was not very encouraged by Roland's behavior. And as a matter of fact, told him, he says, "Alcoholics of your type are really hopeless. Not much you can do for them. They're really hopeless." And he said, "Isn't there anything?" And he says, "Well, every once in a while some people get a spiritual experience which causes some psychic change in their mind, and they recover." And he said, "Well, how do I get that?" And he said, "Well, you have to hook yourself up with some religious group." And on the way back, he hooked up with the Oxford group in London. It was actually started by a man here in the United States, a fellow by the name of Buckman. But it was in London at the time. It was called the Oxford Group. And they were basically first century Christians. That's how they formed their group. They would witness to what God's power had done for them. They would witness to what Christ had done for them. And he became hooked up with them. He came back to the United States and began an Oxford group in the Calvary Church down on 22nd Street. And what was then 4th Avenue is now Park Avenue South. The church still remains there. And as a matter of fact, there's a window. I've gone down there. I'm so much of a history buff for AA. I went down to the church, and I went to the back of the church, and sure enough, there is a window in the church dedicated to Roland Hazard. But anyway, Ebby Thatcher was also in his cups at this point. I don't know if that was a disease of that part of Vermont, but anyway, Thatcher was in very bad shape, and he had been either picked up for drunken driving or public intoxication a number of times, and they had a law in Vermont then that if you were arrested for drunkenness 3 times, they would appoint a lunacy commission for you, which means that somebody would take care of your assets, and you were crazy, and they would lock you up. And Ebby Thatcher was doing pretty good until his car went off the road, and he ended up in a farmer's kitchen, right through the wall and into the kitchen. And he got out of the car and I think inquired where he was, and somebody called the police, and the first thing you know, he's before this judge again. And at that time, Roland Hazard came to the judge and said, "Give this guy another chance. I think I have an answer for him." And the judge said, "All right." And Roland Hazard entered the Oxford group, and he became sober. And then Roland Hazard tells the story that he was meditating one night. And in his meditation, he got the message that he should call Bill Wilson. Out of the blue. I hadn't seen Wilson in years. Now, Wilson was no better. He'd gone into the Army in World War I, and he wasn't a very religious guy. The only time he really got religion is in that when he was scared, when he was afraid he was going to die. Just for that doggerel that he read, the Hampshire Grenadier, in the lead-off paragraph in Bill's story. He really thought he was going to die, and he was afraid of going into war. He didn't want to get shot at, and he felt close to God then, but that's all. And his drinking got no better. He went to a law school, and he never became a lawyer, but he got married to Lois, and they lived in Brooklyn. And the Depression came, and he was out of work, and he was drinking, and he couldn't find a job, and he was getting worse and worse, and he was being admitted into Towns Hospital at that point on a regular basis. And it was 1934, and I think he'd been in Towns Hospital 8 times in 1934. He just could not stay sober. Didn't know how to do it. The story goes that he overheard Dr. Silkworth talking to Lois. And Dr. Silkworth said to Lois that when he comes out of here, if he drinks again, don't bother coming here. Go directly to the undertaker, because that's where he's going to end up. He's going to die. And Bill overheard that conversation. And so he got out of the next to the last confinement in Towns Hospital about October of 1934. And he tells the story that he lived in Brooklyn, and he took the ferry to Staten Island to play golf, and he got to Staten Island, it was raining, and he didn't play golf. So where do you go when it rains when you start out to play golf? He went into a bar, and he met somebody there, and the fellow said, will you have a drink? And Wilson described, he said, as he told it, no, I can't have a drink. If I have a drink, I'm going to die, and I don't want to die, and so I'm not going to drink. I'm an alcoholic, and so forth. And then, because it was Armistice Day was a big deal in 1934, the bartender bought a round of drinks for everybody. And Wilson says, I'll have one. And the guy said to him, I thought you told me you were just going to die if you had another drink. He said, yeah, but it's going to be all right. And of course, he went back again and again, and he got drunk and went home, and the same routine happened. But as a result of Evie's meditation, he called on Bill that night, and Bill was surprised to see him. He telephoned him, said he was coming over, and Bill saw something in him that he hadn't seen before. He was sober. He thought he was going to have a drinking buddy, and Bill was sober. Evie was sober. And he said, what happened? And Evie said, I got religion. And then Bill shut him off, really. Evie talked with Bill for a long time that night, and Bill continued to drink, and finally ended up in Towns Hospital for the last time in December of 1934. And he was really at the end of his rope, because he knew he was going to die if he kept on drinking, and he couldn't stop drinking. And that's the moment that he got on his knees, and remembering what Evie had told him about God and the power of God in helping him, he asked, if there is a God, please show him to him now. And that's when the room filled with light, and that breeze came through, and Bill knew that he would never drink again. He knew that his drinking problem had been resolved. He went to Dr. Silkworth, and it's here that I think we owe such a great deal to Dr. Silkworth. He went down to Dr. Silkworth and said, my room filled with light, and I felt this cool mountain breeze go through the room. And Silkworth didn't put him in a jacket, He said, well, whatever it is, hold on to it. It seems to be doing you some good. I see a difference in you. And I don't know that every doctor would have said that to Bill, But Silkworth did, and I think it was very important in the development of AA. So now Bill he got into the Oxford movement when he got out, and he tried sobering up drunks, and he had no success. And he complained to Silkworth about it, and Silkworth said, you know, you're really trying to lecture, Bill. You know, having some guy come to you, you know, when you're down and out in some mission in the middle of Manhattan and saying, you know, my room filled with light, and you'd be surprised. I'm okay now, you know. Okay, pal, we'll see you. And he wasn't getting anywhere. And Silkworth said, tell him the nature of the disease. Tell him the hopelessness of the disease of alcoholism. Tell him what you've learned. And he had a deal out in Akron, Ohio. And he went out to Akron in May. And as God would have it, the deal fell through. I often think what would happen to us had the deal clicked. You know, we'd all be in trouble. But the deal fell through. And he was broke. And he had a hotel bill to pay. And I believe it was the Saturday before Mother's Day, 1935. And he was torn between what the book refers to as a gay bar or a gay crowd, which had certainly a different meaning in 1939 than it does today. And he was torn between going into the bar and doing something else, and he was kind of lonely in Akron. I don't imagine there's a great deal to do in Akron even today, but it's a strange place to start this fellowship, it seems to me. At any rate, the story goes that he finally made some telephone calls, and he got a hold of a Reverend Tunks. And I'd like to share with you a thing that I got my hands on some years ago. As some of you may know, he was finally put in touch with a Henrietta Seiberling, who was a daughter-in-law of Firestone Tires. She lived on a gatehouse at the Firestone estate. There was a tire years ago that was a Seiberling tire. I don't know if people remember it or not, but at any rate, she was separated from Mr. Seiberling, and she was very active in the Oxford group in Akron, Ohio at the time. And so was Dr. Bob, very active in the Oxford group. And back in the spring of 1971, they asked Henrietta Seiberling to speak at Founders Day in Akron, Ohio. Founders Day is an event that occurs every Mother's Day, or June, the beginning of June, in Akron, Ohio. And they celebrate the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous. And they have a meeting out at Dr. Bob's grave. And they asked Henrietta to speak. And Henrietta was ill. She was in New York, and she couldn't speak. Her son was then a congressman from that section of Ohio. And he called her and asked her to tell him what went on in May of 1935 with the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous. And she spoke to him, and he recorded it. And then he had it transcribed. And they have provided a transcription of what Henrietta Seiberling said happened in May of 1935. And it's fascinating. She says that someone spoke to her about Bob Smith's drinking. He didn't think anybody knew about his drinking. He thought he was like we all, you know, we're closet drinkers. Except the closet happens to be White Plains. And she invited Ann Smith to bring Bob. Now, Bob had been going to the Oxford group meetings for about 2 years. He was a very spiritual man. Very spiritual man. Couldn't stay sober. Drunk all the time. But very spiritual. So she said to Ann, bring Bob. She didn't tell Ann what was going to happen, but they wanted Bob to share at depth about his problem. They wanted him to talk about it to the group. And she thought to herself, will Bob say something? And sure enough, in a deep, serious tone, she goes on, he said, well, you good people have shared things, and I'm sure are very costly to you, and I'm going to tell you something which may cost me my profession. Everybody knew he was a drunk, but he didn't. I am a silent drinker, and I can't stop. This was weeks before Bill Wilson came to Akron. So bear the time frame in mind. And so they said, do you want us to pray for you? And he said, yes. And someone said, do you want to go down on your knees and pray? And he said, yes. And so they all got down on their knees and they prayed for help for Dr. Bob. The next day, Henrietta says she prayed for guidance. And the guidance came to her, she says. Something said to me, I call it guidance. It was like a voice in the top of my head. Bob must not touch one drop of alcohol. So she called Bob up and she told him of her guidance, that he mustn't touch one drop of alcohol. He came over to the house that morning. She goes on to say that he was very disappointed because he thought guidance would mean seeing somebody. Henrietta, I don't understand it, he said. Nobody understands it. Some doctor has written a book about it, but he doesn't understand it. I don't like the stuff. I don't want to drink. And I said, well, Bob, that is what I've been guided about. And that was the beginning. And then 2 weeks later, Wilson calls and says, I'm from the Oxford group, and I'm a rum hound. That was his words. And Henrietta said, this is manna from heaven. And so he came out to Henrietta's. They tried to get Dr. Bob that night, and they couldn't get him because he was drunk. Mother's Day was the next day, and I think Ann said he came home with a potted plant, and he's under the table potted, and there was no sense talking to him. Then Bill went over to see him the next day, and or they came to Henrietta's house the next day, and Dr. Bob insisted on a promise from Ann that they would only stay 15 minutes. And Dr. Bob stayed 5 hours, and they talked. And Dr. Bob, as you know, was not finished. He went to Atlantic City and tried to drink Atlantic City dry, and came back home. And on June 10th, 1935 was his last drink. And that's the beginning of our fellowship, June 10th, 1935. These two men got together. It's scary. You know, it's scary that they're praying for somebody to come, and somebody comes, and they get together. And 60 years later, we're in Harrison, New York, talking about the first step. You know, it's scary to me. Dr. Bob, as I said, was a very spiritual guy, but he couldn't stay sober. And Bill brought to him exactly what Silkworth said he should bring. This is a hopeless state of mind and body. This will kill you. Alcoholism will kill you. And putting that together, it started. And we are so fortunate to have these men. Because Bill stayed out there for 3 months. What he doesn't tell us in the story is that he was housed at a country club in Akron, Ohio, that Mrs. Seiberling was able to arrange for him. So it was not exactly root canal staying out in Akron, Ohio. But at any rate, they went out there and they studied this book, William James' Variety of Religious Experiences, And I don't know if any one of you ever tried to read that book, but if you get past page 10, you have my congratulations. It's really not one of your, it's not a Robin Cook novel. And it's very difficult reading. And they read it. And they read the Bible, and they read the Gospels. And they were concerned about this spiritual experience that was so necessary to get sober. And Bill came back to New York, and they wrote the book. And I came across the New York Times book review of Alcoholics Anonymous. June 25th, 1939. The book was reviewed by the New York Times. And I won't bother reading it all to you, but it says, most readers will pass this book by. Yet of such a majority, many might not be amiss, but for the grace of turning its pages. There, but for the grace of God, goes. A few will reach for it furtively. It is a strange book. The argument, as we have said, has deep psychological foundation. It's quite an interesting article. If you want to look at it, I'd be happy to show it to you. So the book was begun, and the steps were begun, and the first step was written. Now, if somebody ever gave me the job of writing a program, because we do so much program work today, writing a program for people to recover from alcoholism, the first step would not be something I would draw up. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. My program would probably be stop drinking. Stop drinking. Step one, stop drinking. Simple enough, to the point, no. But they discussed now, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. That's a strange word, powerless. I don't recall discussing powerless in any saloon that I was ever in. I don't remember the subject coming up. We discussed a lot of things, important things. In my days in saloons, it was, should Red China be admitted to the UN? Should priests marry? Important stuff, We never discussed being powerless over alcohol. And to be honest with you, I was in this program a long time before I could really conceive of being powerless, having no power. When I was growing up, they had 78 records. Some of you probably don't remember back past 45s, but these were 78s. And what would happen on a 78s is sometimes you get a bad record and get stuck in a groove, and it would be a broken record, and you hear vroom, vroom, same story all the time. And it was explained to me when I came in here, my mind was like a broken record. I was in that groove. I was in that drinking groove. That's all I thought of was drinking. And it went rum and rum and rum, and wherever I did and wherever I went, it was drinking. And don't interrupt that. Just drinking. Who I associated with, who I went around with was drinking. And I may pause from the drinking every once in a while. I didn't know what the word stop meant. Pause. I would pause. Sometimes I'd pause for months. Just right in there. Never got that needle out of that groove. It just went around and around and around. Let me just tell you a little about what alcohol did for me. I was a skinny, klutzy kid. That's the best light I can put on it. And I remember drinking and what whiskey did for me. Whiskey cleared up my face, made me a little muscular. I almost felt Italian, It was that good, you know? And I could talk to girls. I could dance. I had no fears. I could handle things. I really felt wonderful. I defy you to make me stop that. I defy you to make me stop drinking. It was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Everything was great. See, I believe that the world for the alcoholic is very loud. Very loud. I don't know, people zero in on me. When I was drinking, the kids didn't listen to me. My wife didn't listen to me. Other lawyers didn't listen to me. Judges never listened to me. And it was loud. The world was loud. I was inadequate. When I passed the bar examination, I knew they made a mistake. I knew it. There's something went wrong there, and they got the wrong number, and I got by, and I'm not going to say anything. I was very inadequate. If I were disappointed in anything, I was in depression. If I was uncertain of anything, I was terrified. That's the way life was. It was that way. And then, see, everybody's going to stop drinking sometime. If you're new here, you're going to stop drinking sometime. It may be when you're dead, I don't know, but you're going to stop drinking sometime. It may be when you're locked up, but you're going to stop drinking sometime. And on July 14th, 1969, I was going to die. If I didn't stop drinking, I was going to die. And I said that. I said those very words to my brother who was with me. My brother's my law partner, and he had a kind of a pecuniary interest in my recovery. And he said, well, your brother Jimmy went to AA, why don't you go to AA? That seemed like a good idea at the time, since I didn't want to die. And I said, if I don't stop drinking, I'm going to die. And we went to the Chappaqua group of AA. Drunk. Very drunk. Walked in drunk. And I was met by a man who became my sponsor. He was brilliant. I told my wife I met a guy who hadn't had a drink for 2.5 years. And I talked to him. And he talked to me. And I touched him. 2.5 years without a drink. Do you hear what I'm telling you? 2.5 years without a drink. He was a genius. And he said to me, do you think your life would be any better if you didn't drink? Well, I said, well, I wouldn't die because I'm gonna die if I don't drink. And I said, yes, my life, I have a wonderful wife and family, and I have a great business, but I'm drinking it to death. And he said, you're in the right place. And he took me back to his house. And then, of course, what sets into all of us, I think. I hadn't had a drink in a couple of hours. Well, what the hell am I doing talking to this guy for? I'm going to live. Why am I talking to this guy from AA? As a matter of fact, I want to let him down easy. I said to him, he put in so much time. I said to him, it was Don Huff, incidentally. It's Connie Huff's father. Connie comes here every once in a while. And I said to him, I said, Don, I really want to stop drinking tonight. But in March, I go on vacation, and I always drink on my vacation in March. And he laughed, just like you did. But I tell you, that's a quote. And he said, Jack, this is July. And I got this flash for you. You cannot drink in March in July. You have to wait for March to come. I thought that was profound. I really did. And I asked him to repeat that because it really hadn't sunk in. He did. And he said, you have to wait for March. All you have to worry about is July 14th, and you get to bed tonight, and that's great. And he burned into my head this idea of one day at a time. One day at a time. And I think that's the key to it. I'm powerless over alcohol, and I can stay away from it one day at a time. And I put those days together, and as I said, the good Lord willing, it'll be 20. I wonder how these things go together like this. It'll be 26 years in July, hopefully. And but that's not all of it, is it, in AA, huh? It's not all of it. You see, the world is still loud. There's still uncertainties. There's still disappointments. There's still feelings of inadequacy that are still here with us. And so thank God to Dr. Bob and to Bill Wilson, who didn't end with just stopping drinking. I had a friend of mine some years ago said, we get the whiskey out of you in 5 days. That's easy. But there's a shot glass in your head. We got to get the shot glass out of your head. And that takes a little while longer. And when the shot glass comes out of your head, then you're on your way. I still struggled with the word powerless. I wanted to change the step. I wanted it really to say, admitted we had problems with, admitted we have trouble with. Whiskey works, doesn't it, huh? Whiskey, when this loud world hits us, whiskey works. Whiskey calms the world down. Makes it livable. Huh? A little whiskey and everything seems nice. I can handle the uncertainty. Like, who cares? I can handle those disappointments. So what? Inadequate. Are you kidding? They got the best lawyer. I never lost a case in a bar. I never lost a case in a bar. Whiskey works. See? And I felt good about myself. And it's wonderful. Whiskey. I'm looking at Phil here, and I bet you nobody ever brought a bottle of whiskey back to Phil and said, give me my money back, it doesn't work. Nobody ever said that. Because we know that it works. No refunds in Phil's store. Here's what I think about drinking. I don't think any one of us take one drink. You see, this March came around for me that I talked to you about when I first came in July. March came around. And I still had this thing in the back of my head. I wanted to drink. I was a drinker. The groove. I was in that groove. That was a drinking groove. That was my life, that groove. And I said to my sponsor, I want to drink on this vacation. I'll be all right. It's on a ship. Nothing can happen, He says, Jack, You're an alcoholic. Nobody ever called me that. He said, Jack, you're an alcoholic. Oh, yeah? He said, furthermore, you're a disaster drinker. Nobody ever told me that. He said, once you begin to drink, your drinking will not end until a disaster occurs in your life. Was he right? Was he right? I couldn't argue with that. He had me by the throat. Because I really believe that. We don't pick up a drink. We begin to drink. I never had, gee, I think, I have a glass of Muscatel or something. Unless it came from under the front seat of the car, for Thanksgiving or something. Never occurred to me, We begin to drink. I once heard a story of a fellow who was up in the old Casas Arena, and he talked about, he went on a boat ride one summer, and he was a member of AA, and he had a drink on the boat ride in the summertime. And he didn't have a drink for the whole year when he went back on a boat ride again. But he couldn't wait to get back on a boat ride the following summer. He had begun to drink. So it really doesn't matter how many months separate one drink from another. It doesn't matter, because we begin to drink, and the drinking doesn't stop until a catastrophe happens in your life. We had a guy in our group some years ago who, resigned from AA. Some people do that. They resign. They come to you and say, this is a wonderful subculture you have, but it's not for me. And this guy told us that. He said, it's not for me because I don't have this compulsion that you people talk about. Good luck, good luck. I wish you all the luck in the world. Never seen it happen. Never seen it happen. I have this white crow theory. I've never seen a white crow. I've never seen a guy leave AA, call me up, start drinking, call me up and say, Jack, things are better at home, things are better on the job, I feel wonderful, and I'm going on vacation. I've never heard that from anybody. And I've never seen a white crow. I suppose when I see a white crow one day, maybe that'll happen. But it's never happened to me. This guy said, I don't have the compulsion that you people talk about. Saw him about 6 months later. I said, he didn't look too good. I said, how's it going? He said, a couple of nights after I left you guys, I went into a bar and I ordered scotch and water. Gotta try this out. Oh, I finished the scotch and water. I said, how'd you feel? He said, I felt no compulsion. Good. And I ordered another scotch and water. Cunning, baffling, and powerful. Huh? The disease is that. So, I think that that's powerless for me. I cannot begin to drink. I cannot take drink number one. I have no power over it. I used to live next door to a guy. We'd go to the same parties together. I didn't really care for this guy, and you can understand why in a minute. He would have 2 or 3 drinks and go home. And I would be at the same party, and I would drink the place dry. They'd throw me out, the whole routine. And I'd wake up the next morning. This guy's cutting his grass at 10 o'clock in the morning, and the dog walking across the linoleum is giving me a terrible headache. I couldn't understand it. I could not understand it. And I remember looking at myself in the mirror in those days. What the hell's the matter with you? What's the matter with you? Why can't you drink like somebody else? There was a special part of the Mass, and it would pray for your own intention. My intention was, please make me a social drinker. That was my intention. That's what I wanted to be, a social. I didn't really want to be a social drinker. I didn't want to be like this guy next door. I mean, that's ridiculous. Why? I wanted to be a social drunk is what I wanted to be. I wanted to drink and not get in trouble. That's what I wanted to do. But I couldn't work that out. It did not work out that way. It just got into the trouble was unbelievable. And I'm not even going to go into that now because that's, so I think the first step for me is that I have to realize that once I begin to drink, that drinking will end in a disaster. Now, I think the message that we have to give to everybody who comes into AA is that if you continue to drink, you're going to die or you're going to be in custody of some sort. I think before they leave, they have to hear that if you continue to drink, you're going to die or you're going to be in custody. Either you're going to be locked up in some Twitch farm, or you're going to be locked up in jail, or you're going to die. I think that's a message that we have to give. I think that's a message that Bill brought to Bob. And if we give that message, then I think we have done what we're supposed to do. Marianne has given me how can I be an alcoholic? I didn't drink every day. I never took a morning drink. I only drank periodically. This, I think working with newcomers is one of the greatest thrills of all time. Everybody should have a lunatic in their life. Everyone, The person who says, Jack, you don't understand. You don't understand me. Well, why are you so different? Well, you see, I just think working with newcomers and answering their questions and just trying to work out their little problems is just so much fun. I had a guy call me up at 7 o'clock one morning, says, my wife burned the English muffin. All right, Bob, what else? No, that's it. She burned the English muffin. No kidding. Both English muffins? Both of them. Oh, okay. Well, we'll discuss that tonight. Okay, click. I mean, if anything keeps you sober, it's a newcomer, right? I mean, it's so wonderful to talk with these people and remind yourself of where you were. Yeah. You explain why alcoholism is called a disease. First of all, alcoholism is not a disease that you catch at a rehab. I think a lot of people think that you catch alcoholism like a tsetse fly or something. You go to rehab and something happens to you and you come back an alcoholic. I don't think that. I think it's a body chemistry, like this fellow next door to me. I think I think this guy didn't have the chemistry I had, because no way in the world that I could take 2 or 3 drinks and go home and go to sleep at 11 o'clock at night and get up at 8 o'clock in the morning and cut the grass. No way in the world. Couldn't do it. What's the difference between social drinking and alcoholic drinking? Well, I don't understand social drinking. That's a difficult question, really, I don't understand social drinking. I know it exists. But to understand it, to understand why somebody would leave something in their glass, I don't understand that. Why? I don't forget one time we were invited to a very fancy place. The fellow was a radio announcer, a nice guy. I was working as a waiter at the time, and he invited the whole restaurant to his house. He was really a super guy. He had the nerve to put the whiskey away at 10 o'clock at night and serve coffee and cake. I went right up to the door where he put the whiskey. I opened the door, opened it, took it out, poured myself a drink. I thought absolutely nothing of it. I got in the car. My wife was mortified. She said, you are an embarrassment to bring out. So what are you talking about? That guy never should have put the whiskey away. You don't do that at a party, put the whiskey away. So that's, you know, I don't understand social drinking. What role will willpower play in alcoholism? You know, I think what we have, what's evident to all of us is that our willpower has no effect on our alcoholism. God, I believe AA is the only organization in the world, the members of which never wanted to belong to it in the first place. I mean, we didn't go through high school saying, someday I'm going to be an AA member. You know, we're no volunteers in this room. So, you know, willpower, if willpower had anything to do with it, we wouldn't be here. This would be an empty room. We'd just stop drinking. But we need a solution. And that's what we're going to talk about next week, is we're going to talk about the solution next week and how important that is to us. But willpower, the only thing it was able to do for me was to have me pause in my drinking. And sometimes I would pause for long periods of time, 6 months, 8 months sometimes, you know, really long periods of time. But I never got sober, you know, that state of mind that you get in AA, that freedom that you get in AA, that the drinking is behind you and it's not a concern anymore, as long as I do what I'm supposed to do. That kind of freedom. Never got that in my, you know, I was pausing. I couldn't wait until the opportunity presented itself to have another drink, and I did that. What is meant by the we of the program and how important is it? We have to do it together. I think this is something that we do. If there's anything that worked for me initially when I came into AA, it was you people. You know, I came in, I thought I was going to die. I look around the room, everybody's having fun, everybody's laughing. I think AA is the only place in the world that you can go where you can stop drinking and have fun. I don't think you can have fun anyplace else and stop drinking. I had a father who stopped drinking lots and never had a lot of fun. But I remember coming in, I look at these guys, how long? This guy, 2.5 years. Look at him, 2.5 years sober, not a drink in 2.5 years. My God, it's wonderful. Some guy got up and he said he hadn't had a drink in 24 years. I'll never forget this night. I was sitting in a chapel car. Never forget this night. He said he hadn't had a drink in 24 years. What kind of a life must this man have had? Huh? Oh, everybody looked so good. Everybody wasn't drinking. And I knew, I just didn't want to let anybody down, I think, in the beginning, you know. I don't want to let my sponsor down. I don't want to let this guy down. I don't want to let that guy down. It's the power. The power in this room is greater than the sum of the people in this room, for some reason. Huh? The power here is greater than the sum of its parts. And it works on us. It works on us. These people are doing it, and I can do it. And I think that's what they mean by the we part of the program. And next week we'll discuss the solution. And thank you.